I'm Maureen Ballatori, and this is Spilled Salt, a podcast on the thrills and spills from the food, beverage, and agriculture industries. Today's guests are Maddie Rotman and Taylor Lanzett, co-founders of Anytime Spritz. Anytime makes organic and regenerative spirits and cocktails that are better for you and our planet. They've made the first regenerative organic gin and vodka. This conversation is a part 2 from last week's episode with Dylan Vaca of DeLong Company. Anytime is working with DeLong to source the regenerative grains for their products. I absolutely loved today's chat with Maddie and Taylor, especially because we get to nerd out on food sourcing and regenerative ag and what that means to farmers and what it means to consumers and what it takes to develop a brand that sits in between those two things. Fascinating discussion. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Hello, Maddie and Taylor. How are you?
I'm good. Happy to be here.
Good. Thank you. Awesome. So glad you can join me. We were saying in the pre-show chatter here, and sometimes it happens that it sometimes is kind of interesting to navigate more than one guest on the show, but it'll make for a really great conversation, I'm sure. So the way that I always love to start these is with the background. I'm a big believer in everything that you did before is, part of the reason why you're doing what you're doing now. And so I'd love for you to start me off with like the ghosts of your career pasts. So Maddie, why don't you start?
I love the ghosts of your career's past. Taylor and I actually met in college. It was my first day of Brown University, and I stumbled into an intro to environmental studies class. And there was Taylor as my TA for the class. And so we sort of joke, it all began there. But really, the ghost of our past is just fruits and vegetables. We met in college and ran a CSA, which I think your viewers will know, but a community-supported agriculture program. We worked with farmers in Rhode Island, and really we're just trying to figure out ways to get really delicious fruits and veggies that farmers were growing to a university campus to feed not only the staff and the faculty, but also the students and the grad students, and really build a community around this agricultural practice. And that's where we sort of began asking these questions of how can farmers be at the center of our food system? How can we support local agriculture? How can we work with organic growers and build what they need in the soil and help educate consumers around this? And after school, I'll sort of tell my story and I'll let Taylor jump into hers. But I ran to New York after school and went to Fresh Direct, where I worked in merchandising and sourcing and supply chain around regional growers and really figuring out how to build the Northeast ecosystem of farmers and bring it into retail. Fresh Direct is the largest online grocer in the Northeast. And it was just such a blast to work with these farmers, work with these folks, and work with a team that was really just feeding New York City and sort of make that connection. I then went on to Imperfect Foods, which is now with part of Misfit Market, and was their head of sustainability. And really, again, sort of figuring out these questions of how can we eliminate food waste, put food at the center of the food system, and figure out ways to build a sustainable food system that can scale and grow. And from there was really having this great conversation around what does the climate look like, the actual climate in terms of climate change, and what do farmers need, and how do we build markets around that? And so in that instance, in that part of my career, it was really around figuring out ways to use the whole farm supply. And as we sort of dug into this, Taylor and I were really trying to figure out ways to help farmers use their grain and their entire farm supply system into what later became the Anytime world, which we'll sort of dig into. But that's sort of my career trajectory and path of in the retail space, in the food space, in the farm world, figuring out ways to build what we need in the soil and figure out markets to build that.
So before we hand it off to Taylor for you to chime in on your side of that, Maddie, where did that interest in farmers come from? Did you grow up in a farm community?
No, I grew up in Southern California, where I think I just took it for granted that seasons are not really a thing and fresh food is rampant and beautiful all year round. And when I moved to the Northeast in Rhode Island, was just kind of shocked that the most expensive farmland in the country, seasons are real, your vegetables change year round, what's available in grocery stores change year round.
Mm-hmm.
And I sort of credit my family, like no matter what was going on in the world, like we all sat down to the dinner table and there was always a meal served and we like had hard conversations around that. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think my interest in food really just came out of like, how do you solve problems? It was always at the dinner table. And
Yeah.
it's a great place to like have a
Mm-hmm.
new eating ground.
I love that. Solving problems at the dinner table. Taylor, what about you?
Yeah, my ghosts I really like. I was happy with the ghosts of my past, but I left school and similar to Maddie and sort of meeting our Maddie's first day as a TA in environmental studies. Um, I went on to work for Dig Restaurant Group, fast casual chain in New York City. Um, in college, no one had said the word supply chain to me. It was, you work, you study environmental studies, you go to work for Greenpeace, right? Or you go to do something very activist, boots on the ground focused. And I kind of stumbled into supply chain and have just never looked back. Um, Dig was very focused on building out their own farm, organic farm in Chester, New York, using that as a source to supply their restaurants. And from there, worked with over 100 growers directly. Um, and sort of throughout, over 6 years there, just learned a ton about what it means to build a thoughtful supply chain that puts the people growing food at the center of menu development, and most importantly, right, was sort of at a price point that worked for lunchtime goers. And so, sort of early on, I started really focusing on what does good, thoughtful for people and planet look like at a price that isn't only for some. From there, I went to work on to a small burrito startup by the name of Chipotle, where I oversaw all their beef and dairy and with their dairy program, Food with Integrity, right? Any
Yeah.
of the dairy you get from Chipotle, those dairy cows have been on grass 365 days a year. I think a lot of us who sort of got started in this can look back fondly on some early memories of Chipotle, right, for over 25 years and see how they paved the way, right? And others have
Mm.
gone beyond and such, but learned a great deal about scale on a whole different level. Um, and then sort of most recently, before Maddie and I fully started working on Anytime, I was head of strategic sourcing and planning for Daily Harvest. So fruits and veggies, hyper focused on organic and transitional organic, and building out sort of fresh to frozen supply chains. Um, the I think 2008 or 2007 read Omnivore's Dilemma, and I hate being the person that was like that book kind of changed my life, but it really did. And I had just never was the president of the high school environmental club and was focused on recycling and read this book and was just like, oh, actually, if I focus all of my thoughts around agriculture, this thing I love so much, the impact I can have on improving our climate, our people's safety, like it just clicked and
Mm-hmm.
definitely just, haven't looked back.
Wow. You both refer to this concept of farmers at the center of the food system. What does that mean to you?
It's a great question. I really believe that no one gets into farming to pollute the water, poison their family, right? Produce something that's not safe or edible to eat. I think if you were somebody who's working the land, especially third, fourth generation farmer, you were just committed to growing land, growing things, cultivating a community, right? Investing in what you do in that physical space. Um, I think there was a couple decades of just like really demonizing all agriculture. And we
Yeah.
know this, right? And people who listen to your podcast know the nuances of there's good, there's bad, and there's some gray, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of
Yes.
better.
Yeah.
And so I think in sort of my work, my sort of excitement, what I like to learn about is just farmers who are, the ones preaching, hey, this is actually this is how we use cover crops here. This is we had to till this year partially because of this reason. If we didn't, or hey, I was certified organic on cherries for 10 years, but then I had a year where I had to decide that it was either my full harvest, right, where I make no money, or I lose that and like that is, I feel like when you have conversations with farmers who are working the land, who understand the nuances of making ends meet, providing good, healthy, safe food, um, when you ask them what products they have to sell, when you ask them, right, how to get them more money in their pockets to keep investing in their farm, that's putting them at the center. And we really think our purpose is have those conversations, find the product, and then find a place to sell it,
Yeah,
right? And if we
right.
can grow that, yeah, Matt, anything else on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the food system is complicated, right? And it's like this big amorphous thing. We're all eaters. We grocery shop, whether it's at, a big grocery store, a tiny store, a farmer's market, something in between. 1 in 3 people in the US work somewhere in the food system, which like could be at a restaurant, could be at a grocery store, could be a trucker, moving food. And there's so many ways to look at this. But for us, we've been really deep in this farm to table retail and restaurant world. Like that's our ghost. And again, we love our ghosts. We're super happy with them. They've taught us so much and it sort of have led us here. We're proud of our ghosts. But so much of that is about how do we build a food system that continues to support the ones that are actually making it continue to move, which is the farmers, right? The folks working the land. And there's so many ways to improve and make our food system better. And a lot of times folks don't think about or listen to the farmers who really have a lot of the solutions. And so I think when we talk about putting farmers at the center of beverage now, we've sort of made a jump from the food space to the beverage space, even though it's food and bev. And the beverage space is missing the farmer. Is a really massive industry that is still based in agricultural products, right? Every drink you drink comes from some agricultural product, and yet the farmer hasn't been talked about here. And so for us, we're really taking what we've been learning and been preaching and been preached to about listening to farmers and solving the problems that they have solutions for through all of these market adjustments, and actually putting them in the beverage industry now at the center.
Yeah, and I think that the exception to that really is like beer, straight up beer and wine, right? Where there is that more direct connection, but anything else, you're absolutely right. There's that ambiguity of the loss of the story. And just as a note, you said something else, Taylor, about the idea of like the farmer's approach to sustainability and doing the right thing. And that sometimes that might mean that it's not exactly the same every year. So we had a guest on the podcast, I think maybe last season, who was doing biodiversity in the vineyard for his winery. And so he's like, it's not full regenerative across the whole farm. I tried one vineyard first and then that one worked and it felt trustworthy. So I went to another one, but we're not totally across the board. And so how did you decide that regenerative, because you have the first regenerative organic gin and vodka. How did you decide that regenerative was what felt right for you? Because that's such a challenging way for farmers to grow with that certification specifically.
Yeah. I mean, you nailed it, right? I think for us, the base of everything we do is certified organic, right? So when you think about sort of standard agricultural systems, right, you have conventional systems, you have sort of like moving along, you have maybe sort of sustainable, right, or minimal chemical use or low pesticide use. You then have certified organic. And then for us, sort of the gold standard of organic system management is regenerative organic. And we found our way to the ROA, or the Regenerative Organic Alliance, really through organic systems. And for us, that's, no GMOs or synthetic pesticides, right? Or fertilizers, right? Really thoughtful crop rotation programming, really thoughtful cover cropping, really thoughtful animal integration. And everything we sort of read and focused on was that regenerative organic is a set of principles that, when done right and are for what your landscape is, right? Improve biodiversity, improve water sequestration, right? Result in soil that is just fundamentally healthier for the land and for us. And the science is very clear that when soil is healthy and not deprived, right, like any living sort of being, right, it thrives. And when soil thrives, it just means it holds carbon. It acts as a carbon sink. Um, and a lot of the work done by some of the leading sort of, Rodale Institute, right, and some of these science-based agriculture investors, researchers, really just have doubled down on regenerative organic being, there's some folks out there who are really focused on regenerative principles, but are still in conventional systems. It's really tough, right? Spraying pesticides, but then also focusing on some other regenerative systems is better. It's not the best. And for us, right, we have a single ingredient spirit. We use 100% wheat. It is easier for us as a single ingredient product to get that certification. We recognize that. But we really landed on the Regenerative Organic Alliance just because we think the work that they are building around consumer awareness, right, to expand organic, right? The pie, it's about making the pie bigger, right? Not sort of siphoning it off. And we're big believers of organic as well. And so to say everything we do is additive was sort of what we focused on.
And so, Maddie, can you speak to how Anytime got partnered with the DeLong Co. to source the regenerative wheat?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple ways to parse this question, but we met with the Regenerative Organic Alliance specifically pretty much when we started our business. We sort of identified that this was where we wanted to go, and there was a white space. Like, we actually reached out to the Regenerative Organic Alliance saying, hey, do you guys have spirits? Like, we don't see one in the market, and started conversing with them around the certification process because there had not been a certification for spirits that were regenerative organic. And so we actually helped them write those standards in place so that we could build out this category. When we began sort of in those conversations, that's how we met with Breathe Deep Farm, who's our regenerative organic farm. They are in Hudson, New York, and they grow our warthog wheat that we grow, harvest, and then stone ground mill and distill. And so there was sort of that trajectory of how we sort of got into that farm and, how we began sort of our regenerative organic process. But I'll let Taylor sort of talk about how we found the DeLong company, because it's slightly separate.
Yeah, they found us. Like, that team is wonderful, and they are really focused on solidifying the USDA definition, right, of climate smart, right? Yep. There's obviously a lot of regenerative work is climate smart, right? And then there's sort of that sort of crossover. For better or for worse, right? Like, that language is hopefully going to become very sort of uniform with regenerative. Obviously, having the USDA back this is huge, and putting money behind it is what farmers are asking for, right?
100%.
Especially farmers who are saying, hey, I've been doing windbreaks for the last decade. You're telling me now I can make $20 an acre on that? That's huge. So they reached out to us and said, hey, we're looking to diversify some of the brands we work with, onboard new farms. And we really just hit it off, right? And we said, hey, we focused on regenerative organic, right? This is our commitment in terms of certification, audit, all of it. And, they said, we want brands that represent a wide range of some of the products we can grow in the US, right? And then sort of make more value add from. And we're really excited because we're at a point, right, where the consumer has a lot of information, and we're putting our sort of back behind regenerative organic and grow smart to be the legacy labels, right? We're not saying that every consumer knows what these are today, but we know that over the next 5, 10, 15 years, if we can take what is right now, which is just 1% of all alcohol sold in the US is certified organic, take that to 2, 3, 4. Like,
Right.
we are transforming farmland then, right? If that's what we can do. So we've loved working with them just because we know their connection to the larger USDA landscape, money, investment, that's huge for a lot of folks.
Yeah, and really it's all about the big puzzle pieces that are made up of the little puzzle pieces,
Exactly.
right? That all go into moving this forward and, exactly like you said, increasing consumer awareness about what this means, right?
Yeah.
Because the three of us and our listeners generally know what we're talking about when we talk about the complexity of our food systems and what does it mean to grow regeneratively, and, well, isn't that just something different? It's not that easy, right? So the more education that can be available, and I think that labels on bottles make a difference, bottles and food CPG as well, because it starts to build curiosity every time somebody sees a new label. Oh, let me learn more about that, and the retailers can also kind of drive the bus on some of it as well. Yeah
I don't think there's been a better time to introduce some of these things to consumers who are, especially younger consumers, who are so deeply passionate about climate change and thoughtful purchasing. It's just right. It's like slowly building all the little puzzle pieces where, if we were to have this conversation 10 years from now, I think the average consumer's understanding is just going to be like beyond what we could have imagined.
I totally agree. So you launched, when did you first launch into the market? Like, when did your first product become available?
So we launched our first product, which is our Anytime Spritz farm to can cocktails, in May of 2023. And those utilize our organic vodka, all real fruits and herbs, and they're just a really delightful, lovely canned cocktail, 5% ABV. We call them our farm to cans because they're just fresh ingredients that are, light and herbaceous and lovely. And then later, November of 2023, we launched our farmhouse spirits, and those are our regenerative organic vodka and gin. So they came out, doing live math, but months later, but all in the same year. We're the crazy folks that launched a brand and launched 2 product lines within 12 months. But it was really important to us to sort of continue to build the narrative and build the portfolio of products that all fall into this. And I think sort of speaking to this messy gray or this messy middle, or like getting better across the board, like for us, it was, we don't need to have one thing. We can have a variety of products that all fit into where consumers are and what they're drinking. Some folks only drink our spirits and don't drink our canned cocktails, or some folks only drink canned cocktails and don't drink spirits. Some, of course, our spirits do great in restaurants and bars. Canned cocktails do so much better, sort of an at-home retail purchase to take to a party, to bring home. And so for us, it's really about just building that variety of our portfolio that all sort of fits into this climate smart growing practices and continues to build organic farmland.
So what has been, as you launched these, I would call it 3 SKUs, but I'm sure it's more than 3 because you have multiple cans, but 3 product lines, call it. What's been one of the toughest parts about scaling?
The alcohol industry is it's organized by sort of a system called the 3-tier system, right? Which is, you are either tier 1, which is a supplier or producer, tier 1, which is a distributor, and tier 3, which is a retailer, restaurant, right? Someone selling it to the final consumer. Every, country in the world has built out laws and compliance around alcohol that in some ways feels way more modernized and advanced than what we still do, which hasn't changed since Prohibition. But we can only sell to distributors, you can only sell to retailers. And when you think about scaling, right, like a lot of the sort of celebrated, super sustainable, super regenerative organic brands of the past couple years, right, have scaled a lot D2C, right, direct to consumer, and then found their way into wholesale. We can't really do that, right?
Right.
And so it's this very interesting, like, we are laser focused in what we actually can do. We can only take on like state by state at a time, pretty much, right? We can only ship into certain states. And that has really sort of, it's definitely made us focus more, but it's also, right, been hard where we look to some of our peers in sustainable products, right, and their ability to sell and get in front of customers, reduce the complexities of compliance are just so much easier. But that also sort of, it's clear to us why then people don't do this, right? Like like
Yeah.
we've, like it's so interesting where we had, had a friend we like were who's in the wine space, and when we told her we were starting this, she was like, just don't. She's like, just don't. Like, we're do anything else that is not alcohol compliance. And we were like, what do you mean? How bad can it be? And we were like, okay, it can actually be that bad. But it's hard, right? Where like we live in a world where you start a brand, the beauty of today's life is you could just make a website and sell to anyone. What we quickly learned, right, is like you need the distributor, and the distributor is selective, and they actually don't want to take on a lot, and just like thing after thing. So it's that I think will be both our sort of ability to focus just in terms of growth, but also has just been a really challenging thing to navigate because your average consumer just doesn't really sort of understand how nuanced it is.
And I think on this, like, we always joke internally, like, we're just doing the really hard thing. And there's a reason no one else has done this or isn't doing this as fruitfully, or, there's so few of us trying to do this in this space.
Yeah.
And, we hold hands really tightly with those folks because we're all trying to grow the pie together. But it's a reminder too of why we're doing this, because there's a reason. These are all the blockades of why only 1% of alcohol is organic. And we're like, there is so much potential and growth, but the folks that have made it or sort of control this industry, they do the same thing over and over and over. And what we're doing looks like massive disruption because we're rethinking what the supply chain looks like, which to us doesn't seem crazy. It seems so normal and so obvious. But all of these blockades really, they do make it challenging to scale. But it's a reminder of like, there's a reason that consumers want this and the options just aren't there. And like, we have to keep building this, but it is hysterically challenging.
I interviewed Bluebird Hardwater on the podcast at one point, and the big challenge that they were facing was canning water is something that you can't do or previously couldn't do. It was very difficult to put water in a can. And when you think about that, right, you think about sparkling water, you think about everything that comes in a can, and you realize, oh, there really isn't like a water. It always has something else in it. And so that was his big challenge. It just reveals why sometimes where innovation is able to happen is when there is a realization of, oh, there is an opportunity here because there's actually a big hole in the manufacturing capability or in supply chain sourcing, or, all of those things, I think are one of the reasons why it's ripe for innovation. But the fact that you are charting your own course here, like you said, hopefully it is something that has a big payoff later because you're trailblazing through this new space.
That's so funny about canning water, just because we've run into similar sort of operational learnings where in doing research with Ball and others, right, like our product isn't filled with heavy simple syrup or sugar. And so when you're filling it, there's just like not enough weight on the counter pressure to like and I imagine the hard water guys had some very similar, like, why is it that hard to put water in a can? And then there you are on a production floor, and you're like, I've never felt dumber in my life. You're just like, why?
Yes.
Like, wow.
Yes. And also, on that episode, we were talking a lot too about liquid death, right? And one of the reasons why that was so innovative was because it had just never been done before. Well, it had never been done before because there literally wasn't equipment and capability in the United States. And so they were sourcing it from overseas for a long time. I think just in very recent years, they were looking to start manufacturing in the US, which is wild. But that's a story for another day. So brands are often asking me about the best way to spend early marketing dollars in those early days of launching and scaling a brand. And it's so different for everyone, right? Depending on like what they're trying to do, the target customer that they're trying to reach. What has worked well for you in terms of your marketing efforts?
It's so funny you asked that. We were just having this conversation this morning because we're at like a little bit of a pivotal change moment. But I'll say that, for our first year in business, we were really, really, really hyper focused on meeting our customers in person where they were shopping. And a lot of this has to do with, as Taylor sort of mentioned, like we aren't a real D2C brand, and we really launched in retail and have expanded to bars and restaurants and sort of the on-premise world. But specifically with retail, we were like, customers buy alcohol when they're buying their dinner. Like it is, or when they're going out to a friend's house and when they're going into the world. This is not a bulk stock up purchase. It's not like, I buy my coffee in 5-pound bags because I'm consistent. It's every morning. Alcohol is not the same way. It is much more of a treat, something you're thinking about when you're eating that meal and you want to have something paired with it. And so we really focused on the in-person experience, demos. We did hundreds of tastings last year, really just engaging with customers and speaking with them and learning what they were thinking and getting their real interactions and feedback, and also sharing our story. And that was invaluable. And, I actually think we had listened to the Stonyfield founder on a podcast talk about this. Like even 10 years in, they were still doing demos because it's such an important engagement and interaction, especially in a digital world where we're all inundated with so much digital marketing. And it's so easy to swipe away from it and not actually get the meat of it. And so for the first year, that's what we did. We're at this very fun pivotal moment right now where we're expanding quite greatly into retail. We just expanded into Whole Foods, New Jersey. And we've got some other fun launches coming up with our regenerative organic spirits. And so we're at this moment of how do we reach as many customers as possible while keeping that same purity and depth of conversation that we're able to have when it's one-on-one. And so, I think what we've learned and continue to hyper focus on is like what's genuine to our brand and what shares our values and how do we find customers that have that same value set. We're really in this interesting space of building a regenerative organic alcohol brand when there isn't even organic alcohol or folks haven't made that connection of I'm shopping I'm shopping at the farmer's market, or I'm being so thoughtful about where I buy my skincare, my pet food, my baby food, and I haven't thought about it in the alcohol aisle.
Right.
And so it's that aha moment that really clicks for folks with us. And so figuring out how to have that aha moment over and over and over again is where we're excited to sort of build our marketing efforts.
I love that. It kind of reminds me of like the early days of Oatly, right? Where they went in through the coffee shops. That was their focus, And so for Anytime, especially that farmer's market angle, I mean, in a perfect world with an endless budget and resources, right? Which don't we all wish? It would be very cool for there to be an Anytime table at key farmers markets throughout the country, right? Because you're so right. That is where your customer is. That informed audience.
You're in our brain.
Yeah. Well, must be a good idea then. There you go. Tell me about a high point and a low point from your time at Anytime.
Oh my gosh, what a hard-hitting question.
Yeah.
It's so funny. It's like so hard to think of it only because we really try to celebrate every tiny win. I think starting a business, it is so challenging and it is so hard. And we come from pretty successful high growth mid-size companies that we've really watched scale from small to mid or small to large. And to build it from the ground up by yourself, as or other founders know, it's just you're really every step of the way you feel every single step. And so I think we're really good at just making sure we're celebrating every small win. But I think the first orders we got, those were just oh my gosh, we did it. We made a product and we're putting it into the market. But I think continuing to get like customer feedback of folks that buy it and just send photos just unprompted, like that is so heartwarming, where we're like, oh, we really built this because we wanted this. And we couldn't find it in the market, but it really is resonating with other customers. That's my high. But Taylor, what's yours?
Yeah, the random text that you just get, right, when you're like knee deep in trying to understand why, the cash is never coming in fast enough. And you're like, this is like, we took this to a party, or hey, I'm just at a party and someone has this, and love that. Um, Also, just people are really supportive. Like, just the amount of sort of blatant, like, oh my gosh, if you need anything, right? Like, just that general vibe. I think that the hardest thing is truly, and I'm sure everyone feels this, but just not comparing yourselves to other brands. Like post COVID, post like what the current macro financial climate is right now, no one can do this the same. And it's very different, and there's no one size fits all. And 10 years ago, it was just about fundraise as much money as you can and spend as much money as you can. Right. And so I think one of the things that I just like struggle with, right, is making sure we're growing at a pace that works for the Anytime business in future versus being like, this other brand did this much faster, but then I have to remember, okay, but that's because they had this other thing. And don't compare yourself to other brands.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know we just mentioned Liquid Death. Like that's one that I speak frequently with students at Cornell University and, other institutions. Yeah. And I use that as a case study because they're hoping to be profitable in 2024.
Right.
Billion-dollar company has brought in hundreds of thousands of dollars in investment, not profitable, right? So I am always talking about what is the kind of business that you want to build. Yeah. And so that's a great approach, is how do I sort of throttle, right? Slow and steady growth that feels right for us, but also velocity at the same time. And it's kind of you're sort of like, you're learning, it's kind of when you're learning to drive, and you've got the pedal on the gas and it's on the brake and you're trying to make it down the road.
Yeah. And I don't know, I feel like there's been a really nice turnaround. Like steady, thoughtful growth is good, right? Like I don't know how another business could do what Liquid Death is doing in today's environment. It just seems like unbelievable to imagine, right? Hopefully we'll be profitable this year as a $1 billion business, but you're like, probably not, right? Like we'll probably take another couple of years.
Right. Yeah. And I think that VC investors in particular have just become so wise to, what good business looks like. And, I think there will always be VCs out there that want to take a chance on something. And that's what the VC world is all about. Right. But yeah, it's what are you building? And I believe in what the way that you two are going about it, in let's make sure that we're doing this right. And when you think about that too, that also gives that respect back to the farmer, right? I want to make sure that we're continuing to grow this brand so that we can continue to buy your wheat and support your farmland and your community. You guys mentioned when you were talking about, why you wanted to partner with farmers and why that was so important to you, with the farmer at the center of the food system, is because they are doing so much more than just growing food. They're creating jobs in communities. They're supporting the local sports teams. They're, shepherds of the land and the community in so many ways. And that is critical.
Absolutely.
How has the anti-alcohol movement impacted Anytime?
I was going to say, like, luckily it hasn't. And I think because what we're doing is different in the alcohol space. We're really big believers in like thoughtful, like integrity forward, flavor forward cocktails. And for us, that's not about overindulgence, which is a lot of the anti-alcohol movement. It's a combating of that overindulgence and that sort of like too much. And so for us, it's about less is more. High quality premium ingredients that just allow you to enjoy the flavor. Very similar to how we think about food. If you use real ingredients, like you don't need that much. And it can just be about the flavor and what you're actually consuming. But also I think like Gen Z is really big on this damp lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
Is, not no and not hard yes. It's sort of this like in between. And that to us really speaks to the similar idea of like, indulge in what tastes great and is a delight, but doesn't require too much.
Yeah. Yep. If you're gonna choose alcohol, then make sure it's an intentional choice. Yeah, I think that's a great way to think about it. And I like to ask that question to anybody who's in the alcohol space, just because it is something that has been, it's all across my TikTok feed,
Yeah.
Especially the last couple of years. And make no mistake, I'm very pro all of this stuff, but I think that you're right. It's responding to the consumer trends in a way that is still aligned with values. And so that damp lifestyle, like you mentioned, I think is a great way to explain it. And so choices are going to be made more intentionally, and it's not just kind of grabbing for the bottom of the barrel. It's seeking what feels right. Last question for you, and then I'll let you guys go. What's next for the brand?
Oh my gosh, we have some other really big retail launches happening this year that we're excited about. And then we partnered with another farm in Montana, actually, who got certified, Regenerative Organic certified with Anytime support. And so we have some other, let's just say, darker spirits on the way with some other really amazing grains that we're pretty excited about.
I love that. I am a brown liquor fan, so
Yeah.
I will run
We'll keep you
to the
posted.
shelves. Yes. Very awesome. This was fascinating. Thank you both so much for your time. It's wonderful to be able to hear your story and share it with today's listeners, especially for the topic of regenerative, which is something I'm really passionate about. I can feel the passion from you, and I know that it's a big area of interest for our listeners. So thanks for joining me. Wishing you all the best. Thank you for listening to Spilled Salt. I'm your host, Maureen Valatori. Spilled Salt is an Agency 29 production. Agency 29 is a brand building firm for food, beverage, and agriculture brands. Learn more at agency29.com. For more information about the podcast, visit spilledsaltpodcast.com. Use that website to send me questions or recommendations for future guests. I always love hearing from you. Spilled Salt is available anywhere you enjoy your podcasts. Please like and subscribe so you never miss an episode.